Hello, I'm Qiraj, or I guess Cyrion now, the most slightly above average warlock in the world. This was originally going to be a video I made in Classic to wrap up the re-release of Classic WoW. However, it is now Sunwell Plateau, and I failed pretty substantially to release this on time. With that being said, this specific video is for the Classic WoW experience of Warlock, and I will be doing another one for TBC. And, as I have no plans for re-rolling for Wrath in the future, I'll probably be doing it for Warlock. All that being said, what do you think when you think Warlocks? PvP Chads? Caster Tank? That asshole with the pets? Slightly more DPS than a Hunter and top end rating? The purpose of this video is as a response to Pine's 10,000 Hours of Mage, through the eyes of the
Warlocks are fucking nukes that never die, holy shit!
Warlock was one of the least played classes during Classic WoW, with more people seriously picking Hunter than Warlock. I hope by the end of this video you can understand what the class is actually, section by section, phase by phase, with its astonishing highs to goddamn frustrating lows. This is 10,000 Hours of Warlock. For the few dozen people who actually did pick Warlock to main in Classic, with just about everyone saying don't if you want to PvE seriously, in the run-up to release, choosing the main was quite difficult. I was never super into PvP, and to this day I would describe myself as aggressively average at it. And for hardcore PvE gameplay, the choices are always warrior, rogue, mage, or a healer that isn't a druid because it's a fucking dogshit class. I ended up choosing Warlock almost completely blind the day before launch because I could always choose something different later, and with launch started, the Warlock experience begins. Warlock leveling is so easy, this cannot be understated enough. Just questing in Phase 1 as a Warlock, you're keeping pace with Hunters, and the only people zooming ahead of you are Mages, because obviously, and the people in 10-man Scarlet Monastery raids before it got nerfed into the earth. Even low-level PvP for Warlocks is really great. With the Succubus at level 20 and Fear, Horde Warlocks could easily 1vx until mid-40s when other classes finally start getting the tools to counter these things. Terran Mill was a play pit for Horde Warlocks. Even if they did manage to kill you, dots would finish them off, pop your soulstone, and now you have the advantage when they respawn. With this in mind, the standard leveling spec of SM Ruin was a perfect combo of survivability, utility, and damage, that only improved over time with the triangle method. The triangle method for Warlocks is very simple. Send your pet in, dot the mob up, move to the next mob, dot them up and fear them, then next mob, dot face take. With Siphon Life, Nightfall procs, meaning you could maintain 3 mobs at once for almost the entire leveling journey. Sure, it's not Blizzard, but even Hunters can't reliably kill 3 mobs at once in Phase 1 leveling. And from this method, Warlocks get the tried and true motto we carry all the way from the launch of Classic to basically forever. If you can fear it, you can kill it as a Warlock. Elites, groups of mobs with Howl of Terror and Seduction, just spam fear, fear juggling. If there's room to fear it, and it can be feared, a Warlock can kill it. Semi-unfortunately, most of the good leveling gear comes from low-level dungeons, like the incredibly good wand from Black Fathom Depths, the Gravestone Scepter. Or the plethora of good caster loot from SM Graveyard, Cathedral. Warlocks in low-level dungeons, though, are awful, honestly. Bringing Warlocks is begging for 2 problems. Actually doing good DPS, but pulling threat off the tank when Shadowbolt crits once. Or even just static constant damage from trying to multi-dot enemies. Or making the healer leave the dungeon because Warlocks will never not use life tap. Fear is also borderline useless in lobby dungeons because fear juggling isn't an option with tiny mana pools and super risky in crowded dungeons like Scarlet Monastery. However, Warlocks were absolutely beloved by one specific group composition, Spellcleave. Having 1 priest, a Warlock, and 3 mages meant the priest could bubble an Eye of Kilrog, the Warlock could then run it through the dungeon, pull everything, and mages could, you know. Overall though, Warlock is really smooth sailing with the abundance of spell cleave comps, giant zones to yourself since you outleveled those filthy melee classes, and carefree PvP. The leveling experience is great. Honestly, it just improves over time with other expansions as well. As briefly mentioned above, Warlock PvP is just mwah. Never in my life did I PvP as much as I did in Classic. My retail account is from the last few months of the Burning Crusade to the present day, having played every single expansion to certain degrees, and trying to get into Arena but failing. Battlegrounds were always my favorite, because as mentioned earlier, I am bad. Average. Phase 2 though, PvP was on site for both factions on Fairbanks. If you were not going to a dungeon too far apart in levels, it was going down. And the PvP experience for Warlocks mainly just got better with every phase. Spell pen gear in AQ40 and the absurd amount of crit gear you had during Nax, you were allowed to do some truly outlandish burst damage from range while still maintaining Warlock's good CC, utility, survivability, and just, it's fucking great. Phase 1 at max level for Warlocks though was odd. While containing absolute highs like being the hardest critting class in the game and being able to shine with the mages on especially long fights like Ragnaros where mages would go Warlocks suffer from a complete lack of hit related talent options, with suppression only applying to affliction spells. You know what isn't an affliction spell? Shadow Bolt. The single ability that comprised 99% of all of your damage done, unless you somehow bribed, begged, or stole a debuff slot for corruption. And God help you if you didn't have a corruption slot in Phase 1 as a Warlock before playing as DS Ruin, because it was basically like visiting a casino for Resist. PvP, on the other hand, was largely fine with the amount of extra stamina Warlocks had, with good CC and Curse of Exhaustion, Fear, Howl of Terror, Engineering items, good dot damage to stop world PvP duels, or even 1vxing depending on the classes and skill levels around you. I suppose we should take a little sidetrack to talk about Warlock specializations. Warlocks have the unique benefit / curse to have pretty terrible bottom row talents, with one exception, with the options being Dark Pack, an ability so pointless at level 60 it might as well just remove itself because improved life tap is in the second row of the talent tree and scales with spell power, though it is good for leveling, Soul Link and improved Spellstone, Soul Link turning you into a walking raid boss but absolutely gimps your DPS since you don't have enough points for Ruin or Siphon Life, at least until TBC. And lastly, Conflagrate. Conflag is an absolutely beautiful, bursty, instant cast nightmare of an ability in PvP during Phase 5 and 6. However, in Phase 1, you had nowhere near enough crit for it to even be viable, on top of the amount of fire immune bosses in the first 3 phases of the game, looking at you fire mages. So because of these messy talent options, we have the pleasure of dividing talents across multiple trees to make unique hybrid builds. The big two being SM Ruin and DS Ruin, standing for Shadow Mastery and Demonic Sacrifice Ruin respectively. Ruin, of course, being required as it increases crit damage by 100%, making Shadow Bolt and Soulfire hit like this. And Shadow Mastery giving you a flat 10% damage and Siphon Life as a bonus for world PvP and farming. Or Demonic Sacrifice, where you sacrifice your succubus and gain 15% increased damage at the price of having no pet, no Siphon Life, or no Nightfall. It was even theorized that SM Ruin should theoretically be better damage than DS Ruin, if you can pray and RNG your way to a bunch of Nightfall procs. But this would of course imply that Warlocks got any support during Classic. At all. Ever. Moving into Phase 2, however, was where Warlocks started to shine as warriors with low gear levels couldn't global people yet. Rogues, for the most part, couldn't kill you entirely within the duration of stuns, and mages will forever be the Fellhound's chew toy. So with the integration of Battlegrounds, Warlocks were a good staple member of pre-made Battleground groups, with all their CC and earlier mentioned Fellhunter making life a living hell for Druid flag carriers and just mages in general. And you know what there's an absolute ton of in Phase 1 through 3 of WoW Classic? Fucking mages, yeah, exactly. Seriously, ask any Warlock who PvPs their opinion about the Fellhunter, and if it isn't anything but gushing praise, they are lying or bad. And since we're talking about pets, we should talk about the others in descending order of usefulness. The Succubus, the other S-tier Warlock pet for Seduce. A soft CC, she can cast an invisibility at a 30-yard range that gives you a massive upper hand in basically every PvP scenario. A common scenario being that you are out grinding mobs for something or questing and you see the warrior on his mount coming toward you. You send the Succubus over to intercept the warrior before they can get a charge off. Cast the Seduce safely at range, then you can dot them up safely out of intercept range and kite the warrior around without them ever getting to touch you. Or a rogue cheap shots you. You can then seduce them, wait until cheap shot wears off, coil, fear, dot, kite, dead. Beautiful pet. 10 out of 10 best girl. Also this. The Imp. Easy C tier. Does meh damage, but you can use it to finish mobs off if you have low health and don't want to tap. Also gives a Thorns buff. HP buff. Not a bad dungeon pet. Decent for leveling. And lastly, the stupid Blueberry, who exists to die and give you a shield and not hold threat on anything. If you try to use him to hold threat on anything past level 30, he just couldn't. Halfway through a single Curse of Agony, you could pull threat off him. Using the triangle method at higher levels meant you would pull threat off the Voidwalker at some point while the mob was still dying, and you would have to just be left with the Voidwalker doing fuck all DPS while you were focused with the other two mobs. Or give you the damage mitigation buff if you were Soul Link and had Master Demonology, but who cares about Deep Demonology because it does no damage? Just D tier. It's a D tier pet. None of the pets are F tier, as they all have situational usefulness, but Good Dog and Best Girl are in their own league. The pets give you this little diagram to understand Warlock's rock, paper, scissors PvP during Classic. Notice the asterisks around 6 of the 9 classes. And while Pint pointed out that the mages lose to the worst class in the game, Warlocks lose to the 3rd least played class in the game that can body you with little to no skill involved. Pet pushback, 41-yard range, an instant cast, range slow, and Warlock armor values equivalent to a leather wearer with demon armor makes us get absolutely shredded by hunters every phase past BWL. Also, Rogue, honestly, past phase 2, even during phase 1, a Rogue will always kill you if they really want to. If they use their entire toolkit, you will never win this fight. But in a BG-like scenario where they have limited CD use, I feel like this placement is correct. And speaking of BWL, the phase that gives Warlocks their Bis Trinket all the way into the Burning Crusade, where it is quickly thrown away for a blue trinket from Slave Pens. Neltharion's Tear. One of the few guild-breaking, annoying drama trinkets for casters in Classic. You kept this trinket for almost 2 whole years. It was that good. And as mentioned before, Warlocks got 0 hit from talents, and Tear had a whopping 2% spell hit. And also a shitload of spell power. This trinket was Bis for Holy Paladins, Ellie Shamans, Mages, Shadow Priests, and Warlocks. Mages got it first because, obviously. Warlocks second if you're Horde, because be honest, there was maybe 1,500 Ellie Shamans raiding main spec and even fewer Shadow Priests. And I'm not an Alliance dog, so I don't know when Paladins got it, but I imagine it's also super good for them, but it doesn't have crit, so I don't know. I personally never got Nelth tier the entirety of Classic, because my first guild died, then I took a break in phase 4, came back phase 5 to a new guild, and was last on rotation for it because I was new. Then I left that guild because it was trash, joined a good guild to also be last in line, and started to do GDKPs for it in phase 6 and never saw it drop once. Still did pretty good though. all things considered, BWL overall, incredible, and to this day, my favorite raid in Classic besides Naxxramas. Shadow Vulnerability was hilarious, with Shadow Bolts critting for above 10k in a time where 5k was considered massive numbers, and then dying because you pulled threat and your lip ran out during the duration before the mob died, and doing insane damage on Chromagus during Shadow Vulnerability, or getting burning adrenaline on Veil. And you get to have this heroic last stand before you die a spectacular death. And Nefarian himself just kind of being a fun encounter with his silly mechanics, and you get to do insane damage with Holy Waters. And then, on the horizon, Hit Gear! Phase 4 in the Bloodvine set. As mentioned earlier though, I quit the week ZG was announced, and I did not return until the week before the gates have opened for AQ40. So I really don't have any authority to speak about this phase, but given this is when Bloodvine came out and Warlocks were finally able to achieve hit cap, I'm gonna bet it was phenomenal. Also, ZG is just a fun, small raid with cool mounts. Like us with the, a tiger, no big deal. Phase 5 in AQ40 though, this is the phase where Warlock scaling comes into full swing. Up until this point, Warlock DPS didn't have enough hit or crit to do viable, consistent DPS. You just prayed for hits, and you prayed those hits would be crits and let you do big damn. But now with AQ40 gear, Warlocks could have hit cap and start throwing gear towards crit, letting Warlocks do DPS upwards of 1400 or more depending on the boss, comp, kill times, etc. This is a far cry from BWL, where pushing 850 or higher was considered godly. All of this, and the cherry on top, becoming a tank for Twin Imps. Warlock tanking wasn't complicated. Just stack Shadow Res gear and spam Searing Pain. But god, it felt amazing to go from a niche DPS class brought for curses to buff the mages and the melee DPS to being front and center, important, and more importantly, required for a major boss mechanic for progression. I, however, joining late, did not have a Shadow Resist set until Nax, and did not tank, ever. Instead, I got to parse, with some big air quotes on that fight with a 95 doing a whopping 386 DPS because every other Warlock was having a tank and the bar was that low. This phase was also the start of spell pen gear and crit stacking for PvP, allowing Warlocks to finally spec into Conflag and start enjoying all that bursty PvP many other classes have gotten since phase 1. But the ability to do it from range, have a massive health pool, and pets. God, it was so good. And finally, phase 6, Naxxramas. Nax was the first hard content in 40-man raiding, honestly. Sure, the majority of the bosses weren't very hard, but the walls of Loatheb, Four Horsemen, and Saffron were very real to a lot of guilds, and really pointed out the difference in a large chunk of the player base during Classic. Many people were so accustomed to the laid-back experience the game had provided so far that finally having some personal responsibilities took the joy out of the game, and for them, they started quitting. But for everyone else who had been waiting for this moment, a sense of real progression, it was nice, and those ecstatic highs of finally killing that hard boss that had been a wall for your raid is one of the best experiences in World of Warcraft across all expansions. And before we walk through the Dark Portal, I must briefly mention the pre-patch. If you weren't a Nax-geared Warlock during pre-patch, you will never get to experience the astonishingly broken state that it was. Shadow Fury hitting for upwards of 1500 damage on a half-second cast that also stunned in an AoE, and on a short cooldown. Also, the cast time on Howling Terror being dropped to the point of it being regularly useful. Conflag still hitting just as hard, but with the addition of Backlash for an instant cast Shadow Bolt on a very short internal cooldown for a cheesy 3k to the face for anyone who got too close to hit you. It was the sign for excellent things to come for our new home in the Outland. Conclusion. Warlock was a pretty complicated beast, but often an underrated and overlooked one. A very good PvP class, and certainly not a detriment to any raid with bringing curses, but fights in Classic were too short for Warlocks to truly thrive in PvE. Warlock can outlast every other caster certainly, but with world buffs and a min-max player base, the niche Warlocks filled was not one regularly needed. With the beginning of Season of Mastery, we saw a little bit of that Warlock excellence shine through without world buffs. Fights got longer and mages were going letting more Warlocks start to shine through. But with PvP gear being so easy to get, warriors and rogues still remained at the top, and once mages got enough crit to make fire viable, rolling Ignite is a hard force to battle. But there are still some Warlocks showing up, which is a far cry from Classic launch where the highest Warlock would struggle to be in the top 50% of damage parses. If I were to play Classic again, I would still pick Warlock, but like everyone else who didn't main one, I would have a Warrior ult. Special thanks to the many friends I've made along the way. Thanks to Kill-A-Lot for making the title card, Windchill for getting me a Nax ID to get some B-roll for this, Malona for helping in general, and the Warlock Discord for being so incredibly salty all the time. Also, if you have the name Kurz on Grob, please hit me up. I know you play Horde, motherfucker. I can add you as a friend, but you've never fucking logged on. Just fucking let me have it. I need it. Cyrion, it's fine. It's okay, but Kurz. It was punchy. It was a much better name.